Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Rise Above TV, where we are empowering humanity and supporting unity. You're watching Good Grief, where we're meeting loss with presence, one wave at a time. Hosted by Janie is the mindfulness coach, and Kelvin Chin, an internationally recognized author, meditation expert, and grief and death guide with over 50 years of experience, helping people navigate life's most profound questions. He is the founder and executive director of the Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation, the Turning Within Meditation Foundation, and kelvinchin.org, nonprofit platforms dedicated to reducing fear, deepening inner peace, and empowering individuals to live more fully in the present moment. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Good Grief, where we are meeting loss with presence, one wave at a time. I'm here with Kelvin Chin. He's been with us throughout the entire series, giving us his insights on grief and death. And we've been talking about all kinds of topics. And last time we left off with talking about suicide. I think we've already kind of touched on it just a little bit, but today we wanted to dive deeper into that subject matter. I know it's very taboo and it can be very confusing and complicated for people to understand. There's still, I feel, a big chunk of society, there's still a lot of judgment. And it's like, why would you do that? That's so selfish. And so we're here to just kind of give our perspective. Again, thank you, Kelvin, for being here. I want to just give you a chance to say hi really
Yeah,
quick.
it's good to be here, Janie. It's fun. It's good. We're here to help people in whatever way that we can. That's the thing.
Yes. And one of the things he mentioned is like, hey, on this one, we really have to just reiterate, we're not like psychotherapists. I want you're probably a lot better about giving just sort of that little like, I don't know, I guess you'd call it a disclosure or something.
Yeah. A disclaimer.
Oh, disclaimer, that's it.
Yeah. I mean, we're not doctors. We're not psychotherapists. We're not trained counselors or psychologists. And if people need that kind of professional help, they should go seek that from
Yeah,
wherever, right?
exactly. And
And
there's a number you can call 988. It's a suicide crisis hotline. Yeah, so it's a pretty simple number to remember,
yeah,
like
I mean, if
911, this is
anybody
988.
Yeah, if anybody feels that need, then we're here to help people to the extent that we can, but we are
Yes.
not trained in the we'll say the deeper areas of that type of psychological issue and so forth that may lead to suicidal ideations and suicide. But we're here more to talk about um, the grief that can come as a result of somebody in your life who has chosen that path, we'll call it, uh,
Hmm.
sadly, tragically, has chosen that path. So that's in the grief conversation that Janie and I are having. That's how it fits in. So we're not here to be helping people who are necessarily having the suicidal ideations or
Hmm.
leaning in that direction and so forth, uh,
Right.
but more helping the people who are left behind after that has happened, right?
Exactly. Yes. And because, we both have worked with people through grief that have dealt with loss. A lot of my clients have come to me who have had like one woman, it was like her son-in-law had committed suicide. And sometimes too, the way they choose to do it or the way they decide to do it can also add another layer of trauma and things of that nature, because there's suicide through overdose and taking pills, and then there's people that jump off the roof, and then there's the hanging, and
Yeah,
there's
and
all
there's
these different forms,
right, and then
and
there's
shooting themselves, and that could be, leave like an even bigger sort of devastation behind.
there's the finding of the dead loved one, and so sometimes you'll hear because you're long distance, you're not near the loved one. You'll hear that they killed themselves by suicide. By the way, that's the phrase that I've learned that is the preferable phrase,
Oh, please, yeah.
killed by suicide, because commit suicide,
Yes.
it tends to be more associated with like it's a criminal act, a crime,
Okay.
like
Okay,
commit
got it.
crime. So they say killed by suicide is the way to phrase it. But I've had clients who've literally gone over to the loved one's house because they hadn't heard, and they found them in a pile of blood on the floor, literally, knives. Now, and not knowing initially, was it suicide or was it murder?
Mhm.
And the police got involved and had to investigate and so forth and so on. And I've had cases in both of those situations where it's one way or the other. I've had it both in terms of my client population, so to speak.
Mhm.
And then the grief and the trauma from going over and cleaning that up or hiring somebody to clean it, or if somebody can't afford to hire somebody to clean it, then they have to clean it up themselves. And it's horrific. I mean, I've been walked through this vicariously. Fortunately, myself, I've never had to personally experience this, but I've experienced it secondhand through my clients. And then
Mhm.
and finding stains later, like months and years later, that they didn't catch. It's just unbelievable, the layers of triggers that can result from something like this. But it's as horrible as it is. The We'll say the treatment, the solution that we're talking about is similar to, what we've talked about already in
Mhm.
previous sessions of the series. It's just more, I don't know, intense, I guess. Yeah.
Yes. And even like you mentioning that how a lot of times an individual will end up doing this like in the house that they live with, and there's other people that are living there and they're not in a position necessarily to sell the house, or maybe they don't want to. And it's like, having to live in this space and having that memory sort of be easily brought to the surface, right? Like that
Yeah.
PTSD and stuff like that. So, like also too, I
Yeah.
want people to understand what suicide ideation is
Yeah.
and a little bit of that. So, I don't know if we want to
Yeah.
first go into, explaining that and or going into what to
No,
say to a
talk
person,
about that. Yeah, there's no particular order it has to our conversation. It's a conversation you and I are always having. So people
Yeah.
eavesdropping on our conversation. So the
Yeah.
conversation is not scripted, as you guys can tell. So we can talk about suicidal ideation. What does that mean? That means ideation means thought, having
Mhm.
an idea,
Mhm.
ideation, a thought about suicide, a thought about killing oneself, perhaps. Very often it just starts, um, again, we're not trained in this, but we're trained in grief recovery. And so in the grief recovery training that I've been through, the certification programs, we touch on this, reminding everybody again, my knowledge is about this deep on terms of uh, suicide treatment and so forth. You need to go to a professional if you're having any ideations or you have a loved one who's
Yeah.
having ideations themselves. But
Yeah.
thoughts about killing themselves or just thoughts about suicide in general are
Mhm.
considered suicidal ideations. They're both
Yeah.
suicidal ideations. But obviously, they are an initial, call it warning light that
Mhm. Kind of come to the
something,
surface for you.
yeah, something's trying to come to the surface and something needs attention. So it's not something that you wait around with. You get somebody help sooner rather than later. Uh,
Yes. I think also too, it's important for people to understand if, and I say this not because I'm like, oh, it's like they're hunky dory and there's nothing wrong with having them and just ignore them. That's not what it's about. It's more like it's it's not so uncommon for us to have these feelings and these thoughts. And sometimes people wonder, and then they think, oh my God, something's wrong with me. And right away they start freaking out. So it's like, I want to try to find the language for people to know that just because you're having them doesn't mean that you're actually going to do it. And it's like, what's that differentiation? When should someone be like, hey, I need to kind of talk to somebody about this versus some just random thought that's going through that isn't so uncommon for people to have, especially with everything that's going on in the world, you know?
yeah, yeah, it's a really good point, but I mean, I'll be honest,
Yeah.
that's above my pay grade, deciding
Okay.
when that is. That's
Okay.
somebody, they got to talk to a professional on that. So I always, if somebody's going down that road with me, on an initial, I do a free initial phone call with people. If they're going down that road with me, I'll tell them they need to get, they need to talk to somebody who's trained, and I'm
Okay.
not trained in it, and I just tell
Okay.
them right up front.
Right.
Um, But
So
if they're having stress issues and anxiety issues that they think that's moving them in that direction, I can help them with their stress and anxiety and help them get reduce and eliminate their stress and anxiety. That's
right.
what I'm expert in. But if they've, I have worked with psychiatrists and with psychotherapists and psychologists and other counselors who are trained in this, and they have referred some of their clients to me who have had suicidal ideations. But again, I let the professional deal with that aspect of it, and I help deal with the anxiety aspect, and working together is, that's the best of all possible worlds, as the phrase goes. So
Exactly.
yeah, but
So
one thing that you're mentioning, which is a really good point, is your point of being that not everybody who has any thought about that needs to go immediately to a psychiatrist and get benzodiazepine or whatever to get the psychotropic drugs.
yeah.
That's where you're going, and I think that's a good point.
Right. Yeah.
Again,
And speaking of drugs, a lot of times too, like, when someone is going through some really deep depression or going through some grief, a lot of times when they go see someone, they'll want to put them on some type of
yeah,
antidepressant of sorts or
yeah,
something, or like a mood stabilizer. And then there's side effects sometimes are like, even when you watch the commercials, like suicide is a
yeah,
side effect, and,
yeah,
suicidal thoughts or whatever it is that they're saying. And
yeah,
so that's something else people need to take into consideration too. When they hear of a death through suicide, we're so quick to jump and judge.
yeah,
And I wanted to touch a little bit on that,
yeah.
and then how to best support individuals who that that maybe have lost someone through that path, like you said.
Well, I'll tell you a true story that happened to me. Let's see. It was December 24th, 2017. Um, so Christmas Eve, right? Christmas Eve, um, I had a phone call with a woman in Texas who found me online, which is where a lot of people find me. She found me online. I did not know her. And she was on benzos. I can't remember which one, Ativan. She was on one of them, one of the benzos. And which, in people who don't know these names, those are benzodiazepine is the generic name, and I can't remember. Oh, there's Ativan and all these other different ones that are the commercial name that you see on TV. Okay,
Mhm.
but they're all the category is called benzodiazepines. You can look it up. They're very powerful psychotropic drugs. Psychotropic means they're changing your brain chemistry. They're meant to change your brain chemistry. That's intentional. That's what the pharmaceutical companies and the working with the doctors, the psychiatrists have created them for, is to intentionally change your brain chemistry to to try to prevent you from killing yourself. Okay. Or to decrease the anxiety or improve sleep. And so there's different ones. Okay. The point is, she contacts me and she tells me that she was with a doctor and who recommended, a psychiatrist, recommended that she learn to meditate. So he's a really good psychiatrist, and that's not all psychiatrists are going to do that. But he was telling her that she needed to learn to meditate to help her get off of the benzodiazepines that she was on, because she was on such a high dose from a previous psychiatrist that just to start reducing her dosage that the second psychiatrist was trying to do was leading to her to have suicidal ideations. She had never had suicidal ideations before. That's not why she got on the benzodiazepine originally, the Ativan or whatever kind it was that she was on. That's not even why. She's never had suicidal ideations in her life until she got on the benzos and she was trying to get off of them. And she told me, and this is, I have many clients, many of my meditation students come to me and they're on these psychotropic drugs. And I don't tell them to get off because I'm not a doctor. I tell them, listen to your psychiatrist, tell them how you're feeling as you work with me with the meditation, and but follow what they say, because I am not trained in this. So what she told me was that her doctor had her taking her fingernail and taking the smallest crumb off of a pill. That's all she could do every 3 weeks. If she took more than that off, in other words, if she took reduced her dosage by too much more than that, she would start feeling suicidal. That's how powerful these drugs can be. So, anyway, we're not here to tell you not to do these drugs. We're just saying that there are side effects. And if your doctor or psychiatrist hasn't told you, then they're irresponsible. So, but they need to be monitoring this closely. And so it's powerful stuff. She got eventually she got off of the stuff working with me and her psychiatrist. But again, you got to go with what the doctor says. I keep reiterating that because it's so important. That's not what Janie and I are doing here.
Going back to the shame and the judgment and things like that, and not everyone always fully understanding, like people could be really shocked when people like Robin Williams, and these people that, especially these like lighthearted jovial people that seem so successful and stuff, it's like this type of stuff strikes people from all walks of life, all backgrounds. And for myself, there was a time when I was in a really unhealthy relationship in like my 20s. I had just turned 21. And without getting into all the details, and it's really interesting how I would end up in these relationships because my mom and my dad have a very healthy relationship. There was not like a lot of like disrespect towards my mom and just a lot of respect with the men in my family and stuff towards women. So that's a deeper story as to why I kept attracting these guys that were pretty, out there. People would think like, oh, you got major daddy issues or something. So I just want to say that first, but you never know why somebody's going down a path, and it's never really the answer. Okay. So, but I felt like the way he was threatening me, he started threatening my family. And I felt like the only way out was that path. So I was living with a roommate, a good friend of mine and her husband. And at the time, by the way, I worked for, an Air Force base here. I had like a civilian job while I was in college at Randolph Air Force Base. And when you go onto base and like start to threaten people, and he would call like my work a lot, that becomes a bigger deal because it's like the government. And like he came on base and like did something to my car. So it was really very embarrassing, because then the people that I work with knew what was going on. And so everybody was trying their best to kind of help me through this process. But I finally got to the point where I was just like, I think I just need to like, I'm just going to take a bunch of pills. And at that time, and in another episode, we talked about this briefly. For whatever reason, I was never really afraid to die, even though now I kind of have a better understanding why. Okay. But back then at that age, I just really wasn't afraid. I grew up Catholic. I even went to Catholic school. My family's Christian. And in religion, at least that particular religion, it's like, if I'm not mistaken, well, one, we believe in hell, right? So it's not about not being mistaken with that. But if you commit suicide, like you immediately go to hell. Those ideologies and thoughts crossed my mind when I was making the decision to do this.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm here, right? But so, long story short, like I had taken all these pills, I had written a letter, blah blah blah. My roommates had gone to a concert or they would gone someplace. And actually thinking about it now, I understand when people are like, how selfish, because can you imagine the trauma that they would have felt like when they came home? Like there's all these things that if you really think about it, maybe would stop you, but even then, you're focused on other things. That's not where your mind goes. And in the letter, it was like, okay, it was almost like saying sorry kind of thing too, and giving my family an explanation as to why I was doing this. So, long story short, they forgot something. And I don't know how long it was, and basically they both had like allergies, and we had like NyQuil, we had all these kinds of over-the-counter drugs, and then they had a bunch of prescription drugs. So I just like poured all of it out, and it was just like a ton of them. And you know what was and this is a piece that I wasn't necessarily planning on sharing, and I don't even know if I'll use this, but I really wanted to look myself in the mirror as I took each one, just because it's like maybe I'm gonna stop. I wanted to like look myself in my own eye. Took all the pills, was just kind of hoping I'd go to sleep and then that was it. And but they forgot something. So, and I'm a light sleeper, and she was like, "Jane, just here to da 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 da." And then I guess she realized
And then she saw me sleep. Well, it looked like I was sleeping. Then she found the nose. She's like, oh. So anyway, they took me to the hospital. Luckily, it wasn't to the point enough time had passed. They didn't have to pump my stomach, but I had to drink charcoal. I remember waking up. My parents were there. Just seeing their faces alone, I thought to myself, I will never, ever, ever do this again. I will say there was this, in a weird way, I was a little bit kind of disappointed that it didn't work, which is kind of fucked up to say. Um, However, I did hear a voice. It was like clear as day. And it was like, you will use this one day to help others.
Mm.
And the reason why I bring it up now is because when people see me and when they're around me, I'm so like jovial and just silly and playful. And it's like, oh, life's all about peace and joy and stuff. But I know what it's like to want to die and to think that that's the only way out,
Yeah,
and to kind of go into that space. And all of the stuff that you have to feel afterwards. I had to work through that and atone to my friends and family, and that took a while, whatever. But the point is, I understand what it's like to not want to be here, and I just want people to know that.
yeah,
But that's
that's
not the
important,
answer. Yeah,
important stuff. Thanks for sharing that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for
I
sure.
mean, Catholics, it's considered a sin. It's
Yeah,
considered, I can't, there's gradations of sin in the Catholic Church. I'm not a Catholic and I'm not into that stuff, but I have friends who are, and they've told me that it's like, I can't remember what it's called, but I don't know if it's cardinal sin or whatever, but it's one of
mhm,
these very high, it's way up there.
yes,
And yeah, and so that's the belief. My experience, let's segue from that. My
yeah,
experience in heaven, and I think I've shared this with this audience already in previous episodes. I've had probably by now, I don't know, I don't know if it's thousands, but hundreds of experience, probably thousands by now, over the last 40 years, experiences with heaven. If we include communications with beings on the other side, it's thousands. But just knowing and being there, like I have an ability to kind of project myself into being in heaven, like temporarily and so forth,
yeah.
even while I'm still in a physical, biological body here on Earth. There is no sinning in that respect in the way that the church describes. Now, I don't want to step on people's religious toes here, but I'm just telling you what my experience is. It's not a place like what people are afraid of. Going to heaven is a very easygoing place. There's no structural hell. There's no structural place of punishment, is the way I think of the way I think that's the way most people think of hell. It's a place. Think of it as a place, like when I say structural, what I mean by that is an automatic place that exists, so to speak. Like Earth is structural. Earth is not an imaginary place in somebody's mind. There's a lot of components to the planet Earth that makes Earth a structural place. In the same way, heaven is a structural place. Now, it doesn't have biological bodies and we don't have physical items there, but we're made of light. And we
Mhm.
have still, I think we've talked about this in a previous session about that we continue, we know who we are. Our energetic mind, our soul, our spirit, whatever you want to call it, continues and we can go to the beach on the other side, but it's an energetic beach. It's not like the beach with the water like we have here.
You're right.
Okay, but when somebody dies, can they be punished? Yes, in the following way. They could punish themselves. People do that all the time, right? How many of you have ever punished yourself about something? You could do that on the other side too. You take your mind with you. You could punish yourself. It's probably not a great idea to do that, but you could do it. Uh, could other people punish you in the sense of what? In the sense of remember that maybe you hurt them. I'm not talking about suicide now. I'm just talking about the general concept of punishment. And so there is no punishment in that way, whether you kill yourself by suicide or whether you hurt somebody else on this side. Do you have to atone for that action on the other side? Well, sort of, kind of, but not really. What do
Yeah.
I mean by that? There's not a structural place of hell, but you do have to atone for it in the sense that whoever you hurt never forgets. I mean, they'll remember. Like never means never. They'll always remember for millions and trillions of years the good stuff you did and the bad stuff you did to them. Each individual mind could remember that. Now, some we don't remember everything and we can forget and so forth. But I'm just saying that, yeah, I'm a believer in treating people well, not because I'm worried that they're going to punish me, but because it helps me live a happier life if I'm treating people that way because people treat me that way. The golden rule, right?
Yes, absolutely. And
But
there's
but
all this evidence too that
no suicidal sin, and you don't go to a place, structural place called hell if you kill yourself by suicide. That I've never ever seen that, and I've never heard of that from any of my clients who've had many visits to the other side also. Go ahead.
Ab- Absolutely. And actually, there's this really cool book. It's called, I have the name right here. It's called The Afterlife of Billy Fingers: How My Bad Boy Brother Proved to Me There's Life After Death. Because I also think that he lived a pretty hard life and made a lot of like, just unhealthy decisions and stuff like that. It's a really interesting book, and you could probably find a video about the story in case you don't want to read the book. And he started to come visit her, like in like I can't remember if it was dreams or just like it was almost like a communication started, and he was helping her understand life after life. At least for me, it helped open my mind a little bit about it. And what I tend to sort of, how you have that sort of innate knowing or a sense of feeling about something, and I feel like it helped validate that. When I work on people and when I do this, it's because I do hands-on work too. It's not just like talk therapy, it's body work and stuff. Um, there have been times, one of my sessions, like they were there for grief over a suicidal death. I didn't have any of the details, but then all of a sudden, the person starts coming through out of nowhere. It felt like my neck got like pulled like with a rope. And then I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like this is going to be weirdo-rama if when I'm done with the session, I ask her, if you don't mind telling me, like, how did he do it? And she said he had hung himself.
Yeah.
So, but one of the things he was trying to just send messages to let her know that he was okay, and he was really thankful for the love because they were really, really, really close. Almost like the Billy Fingers book. I had already heard about that, and then when this happened, it just felt like it all sort of brought it together and just really helped me believe that, whatever God is or whatever you want to call that, I really believe is very merciful and very understanding.
Well, let's talk about the God thing because
Okay.
whether people believe in God or not doesn't really matter.
True.
I help people, atheist, agnostic, or devout believers of God. It doesn't really matter. And again, I'm not here. We're not here to say if God exists or doesn't exist for people. Or I work with people who are devout believers in God, people who believe in God in all different ways. People may believe in God as sitting on a throne, or people may be God as more of an energy force, whatever. It doesn't really matter. I work with people who are atheists and agnostics, etc. But let's make believe that God exists as a consciousness. Does it make sense that God would create a place called hell? To me, it makes absolutely no sense. Because why? Well, there would be two reasons why God could create it, I think. Simplify it to two reasons. One is to punish people. In other words, why would God punish people? Two reasons: to teach them a lesson, to get them to learn that what they did was wrong, or just because God loves to punish people and loves to watch people suffer. If
Yeah, it's
that's
like it's like a sadist masochist. That's how I feel.
exactly, if it was that, then I'd say to people, really? That's the kind of God you believe in and follow? I wouldn't even have a friend like that. So forget about it. I'm not going to have a friend who's a masochist. So let's talk about the first one. Does that make sense? And people will say that, oh, but they need to learn a lesson, so they need to be punished. How many people have children? How many people have ever read any psychology studies about punishing people? Does it really change the behavior? And some parents may say, "Oh yeah, I punished my kid and they don't do that again." Really? Did it really change their behavior, or are they really just doing it now behind your back? All right? And
Thank
so
you.
and so there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, there might be thousands, but I know that there's at least hundreds of psychological and sociological studies done by people here on planet Earth, otherwise known as human beings, that show that punishment does not change behavior. It does not permanently change behavior.
No.
It
It's
just
like fear. You can't use fear to garner respect. I understand what they're doing, but that's not how it works. It's
doesn't
obedience,
work.
blind obedience through like fear and punitive like punishment. We know we have all the neuroscience and all the stuff like you were saying that
Yeah,
it's
right after I was thinking about this, I just coincidentally, maybe not coincidentally,
yeah.
I was at a breakfast meeting downtown here in Los Angeles. This was a bunch of years ago, several years ago, and before COVID. And and who was speaking was the number one district attorney in Los Angeles County District Attorney, the number one person in charge of the criminal system, criminal division system in Los Angeles County. It's a big county, okay? She said she wasn't there talking about God. She was there talking about potential reform of the criminal justice system. But she was talking about how just locking people up and punishing them by locking them up does not change their behavior. It was like perfect. And I took my napkin and I started writing down what she wrote down. And it was something like two-thirds of the people when they're released from prison, 67 to 70% of people, when they're released from jail or prison, are back in jail again within 6 months. And one-third of that group is back in jail within 2 weeks. So that's just to me like a perfect real life example that just simply punishing somebody does not change their behavior. If you want to change their behavior, you have to give them other incentives and this, that, and the other thing. We don't need to get into that. But this is just an example to me that reinforces the concept that if you believe in God, you got to believe that God knows at least as much as humans, right? Are you going to follow and worship somebody who's stupider, more stupid than humans? Well, humans already know that punishment doesn't change behavior. So God's got to know that. So it makes no sense.
That's
But
how
this
I feel
whole
too.
notion has come up in religions. Why? To control people.
Exactly. And not to go too deep into this, but if I'm not mistaken, the word Sheol, it's a Hebrew word, I think,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
Houl or something like that.
Mhm.
Anyway, it was like a place where you like bury or like leave the dead, or it's like a whole, and then they kind of took that and like turned it into this whole thing. And
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
and original sin, how Paul introduced that
yeah.
and all of this stuff.
Exactly. Sheol is not hell.
No.
Sometimes people will point to it in the Bible and say, "No, look at Sheol." No, Sheol is just it's like a in-between place that people go to on their way to what we would call heaven.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. And I also say this too because for a while it's still something I do actually. I had a client here earlier who was 9 years old. So I do some like mindful parenting and like work with children and things like that. But I tell parents all the time when I'm bringing up this idea of like hell and God and when I'm working with people, it's like, do you have children? Yes. Okay. Imagine them doing the absolute worst thing that could be done. Like, oh, they're a serial killer. Would you have it in you to put them in a burning fire? Like, you know what I mean? Would you put them in a bonfire? Like you would not have it in you, and you're like a human, right? Like parent. Here we're talking about the creator and maker of all things. And it's like, yeah, you know what I think I'm gonna do? It's like, what?
right,
It makes no sense. So I
right.
don't want to keep like harping on it because again, I don't want to disrespect those that
Yeah,
believe it, but it really is just a form. Even the word, like I understand back in the day they were like, oh, we're going to use that word to mean like respect, but fear is fear, period. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
there's no way you can slice it and cut it any other way. And that's just a very old school way of even like bosses and like family members, they've taken this idea that we've placed on religion and our holy sacred maker and the methods that they're using in order to get, to teach and to guide and to the and it's that twisted backwards way of using fear. And this is all very narcissistic. You
yeah,
know what I mean? Superiority, inferiority with that sort of concept mixed in it is just not good. And and the evidence is showing, like the research shows, people want to do good for their bosses. They want to do good for their parents when they personally feel respected,
Yeah.
appreciated, valued, seen, and heard. So anyway, getting off that.
So
Um,
let's talk about the concept of suicide and murder and so forth, and our loved ones dying perhaps horribly through that, and the notion of, did they plan that? Was
mm,
that part of a soul plan? Because I hear that in spiritual groups, and
mhm.
I tell people, look, is that a possibility? Yes. What's the probability of that? Near zero. Okay. So we don't know what somebody may have planned, but to say that it was, to categorically say, and I've heard people say this, and I find this, to me, I find quite frankly reprehensible. I don't find this at all palatable, acceptable at all, where people, spiritual teachers, I've heard them say this, that everything is meant to be. That's absolutely not true. And so, and everything was planned out before they came into life. No, everything is not. You could plan stuff out, but other things happen and other minds are involved in what happens in any one mind's life, because that's a very, it's incorrect thinking that everything is planned out and meant to be throughout one's life, because of really flawed thinking on the part of the spiritual teacher. Because any spiritual teacher who says that is telling you that your mind is superior to all the other minds, and that you plan something out, and no matter what anybody else thinks, your plan is going to be carried out through your entire life. Really? That's like the ultimate hubris, the ultimate arrogance, to say that your mind is superior to every other mind. Now, they don't think that through, is the problem. They would agree with me. They'd say, "Oh, I'm not saying that that person's mind is superior to everybody." I said, "Well, you are saying that in the way that you're stating what you're stating, that their plan will work out regardless of what other people think. No,
Right.
we are all affected by everybody else's minds, and we cannot control another sovereign mind. Every soul, every mind is sovereign, meaning they make their own decisions and we don't control them."
Exactly. And how would you say then, like I guess that's kind of tying into the free will thing too.
Yeah, that's
Right.
what free
Yeah.
will is.
Hmm.
Free will just means personal choice. So if we have any like theologians out here who are listening to this, do not misinterpret how we're using the word free will. We're not using it in the theological religious sense of free will, because theologians look at free will and they say, well, then what was the original? They start going back into the Bible
Mm.
view of what was the choice that was made when Adam and Eve were
Oh,
at,
I see.
yeah. So
Yeah. We're
not,
talking about, would you say we're talking more about like self-agency and
yeah,
self-autonomy
we're
and
talking
ability to
about
have choice? Yeah.
personal choice.
Yeah. Personal choice.
That's
And when
it.
somebody chooses to take their life in this manner, a lot of people around them that are connected to them, they have a hard time. Like they almost get stuck with trying to understand, which is where grief can like really become debilitating for
Yeah.
some.
And it is a choice that somebody has made to either kill themselves or to kill somebody else. Either way, it is a choice. It's, to me, it's a horrible choice, but it is a choice that somebody made. And you, with your personal experience that you shared with everybody, people could see that this is like, Janie's a good person. It's not about being a bad person. It's just like a bad decision at the wrong time or whatever, however you want to
Yes.
describe it. It
Yeah.
is. It's just like bad things can happen to good people, and people got to understand that. You know, it's not
Yeah.
always fully in the control of the person. They're not in the sense that, what do I mean by that? We're not always balanced every second of our entire life. I mean, Janie went through a period where she was clearly, we just use neutral language, but
Sure.
accurate language, she was not balanced mentally, emotionally, and physically at the time.
Mm-mm. I
And
was going through so much trauma.
yes,
There was so much trauma that was going on and stuff. So, yeah, and it was crazy because obviously I was like in school and I had a job and I was like still functioning, but there was definitely this like internal turmoil that was going on that I was trying to just kind of keep to myself. Because there's a lot of embarrassment also that goes on when you're in a relationship like that, so you end up and it's not good. Anybody who's in an unhealthy relationship that's toxic, abusive, mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, financially, any of that, please get some help,
yeah,
because you
yeah.
definitely lead down a very dark path where you'll start going into that space.
Look, I mean, I'm going to say something now about this because I, for those of you who don't know me, and some of you do know me, you know that I've had communications with a lot of beings on the other side, including Jesus and a lot of the gurus and Jehovah and others. And look, Jehovah and Jesus, if you're Christian, even if you're not Christian, Muhammad, all of them on the other side, they all understand how horrific the person must have felt at the moment they killed themselves by suicide. To make that to make that choice, because it is a choice. But in that split second, and they may regret it, and very often people do, immediately after they've killed themselves. I know this from other clients of mine and near-death experience clients of mine and so forth and so on who've done this, and then been they didn't die completely, and then they came back. That they regret it a lot of times, regret it immediately afterwards. But it's a choice at that split second moment. And do you not think that Jesus and Jehovah and whoever else you revere as a spiritual guide don't understand that? They Of course they understand that. So the last thing they're going to do is punish you. It's
Yeah, they're not going to condemn you.
no,
Exactly.
no, they
Yeah.
understand it.
I
So
totally agree. And something kind of tying to that, I had gone to this retreat and they had different vendors there and there was a light therapy available. And I'd heard of it, but I didn't know all the mechanics or the tech or the details behind it. So I sat in this one chair and it's going to touch on the whole thing, what you said earlier about, just Jesus and these individuals that really there's no punitiveness, there's an understanding to suicide even though they're not saying yeah go and do it. Um i uh it was right around the time where I was going through, like, I call it my dark night of the soul. It was like post my divorce and I was just doing everything and trying everything just to kind of get back to like my real self, right, and heal all this stuff that was like disturbing and creating so much inflammation. So I was like down for the light therapy. I didn't know what to expect. They put this thing on you and you had like the headphones or whatever. And I won't go into all the details, but it just all of a sudden I saw all this like green and sort of this liquid and there was this understanding. It was like you're in chlorophyll, like you're going through chlorophyll. So I was kind of like going through the color green or whatever. And then all of a sudden it was like really bright white light and I felt as if I was kind of like this and I could see like it was like Jesus in all the different colors that in my, at least in my scapy, right, my schema. At the time archangel stuff were really coming through very strongly, and it felt as if Jesus and all the colors of the rainbow that to me represent all the different like archangels, right, angles of light that are like angels. It started at that time for whatever reason, right? I think when people go through the dark night of soul, suicide ideation was coming through. But I already knew that I would never do that. And that was when I was in my 20s. And now here I am, like 39, what was it? No, 40 something. I can't remember. Anyways, and I'm having this experience and Jesus and all of them, they were like, hey, we understand the suicide ideation because I was feeling really guilty and I couldn't understand. And they started to help me just they were like, "Look, man, this is like heavy duty stuff. It's not a bad thing. You're not like a bad person. You're not doing anything wrong." It was almost like they were trying to help me release the shame and guilt. And it was also helping me even understand and kind of release that from the original time that I tried to do that back in the day.
yeah,
So in this beautiful way, paradoxically speaking, it was saying it's okay, but they were also not trying to say go and do it and we suggest
right.
it. So I just wanted to say that really quick. That was my own personal experience.
Oh, that's great. That's a good sharing. That's good for
Yeah.
people to hear. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if we want to talk about karma since we're kind of touching on
We
like
can
free
touch
will
on it.
and all
Yeah.
this stuff. Yeah, we could touch on it. And then also, I want to make sure that before we wrap up, we'll give people an idea of what are the better ways to hold safe space for people or what to say when you're like wanting to be there for a person.
But people wonder, about the karma idea, and it's like, oh, um, was it their karma to kill themselves, or will they get bad karma from killing themselves? So here's the thing about karma. What a lot of people in the West don't understand, well, I think most people in the West understand that the concept of karma comes from Asia, comes from South Asia, comes from India, that culture. And it doesn't even come from India per se, because it predates India as being a country. This is the notion of karma is thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. Okay. Karma means action. That's all it means. It's neutral. It's not good action, bad action. It's just action. It's a neutral word. It means action. It's a Sanskrit word. Okay. So, what's the history of this notion of karma? So, and how do I know what I'm going to tell you? I know what I'm going to tell you because I've had conversations. Now, you can believe that Kelvin's had these conversations or not. It doesn't matter. But I'll share it with you anyway. I've had all these conversations for the last 40 years. It started happening when I thought it was crazy when it started happening to me. But now it's just very normal. So about 10 years ago, I started having these conversations, which is recent for me. 10 years ago sounds like a long time ago to probably in the audience, but to me, that's recent, because this has been going on for 45 years for me. I started communicating with, so in addition to Jesus, Jehovah, Shankara, who used to be Vyasa in a previous lifetime. Now, anybody who knows anything about the Vedic tradition, they'll recognize the name Shankara and they'll recognize the name Vyasa. But if you don't, I'll tell you who they are. So, first of all, Vedic tradition, Vedic, is an ancient tradition. It predates Buddhism. Buddhism, most people in the West, they've heard of Buddhism. Not a lot of people in the West have heard of the Vedic tradition. But Buddhism comes out of the Vedic tradition. Buddhism is about 2,500 years old, and Vedic tradition, comes out of the Vedic tradition. Buddha started Buddhism, right? Vedic tradition, thousands and thousands of years older than that. Okay, who's Shankara? So Shankara was Vyasa in a previous lifetime of Shankara's. He was Vyasa. You can look this person up, Vyasa, Vyasa. Google him. So Vyasa wrote the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita. So many people in the West have heard of the Bhagavad Gita. They may not have heard of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is the larger body of work within which is the story of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a long enough work itself. But the Mahabharata is even bigger work. Okay, so Vyasa wrote that thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago as a teaching story. And if you don't know the story, the quick version in Bhagavad Gita, there's this character named Krishna and a character named Arjuna, and who's a warrior, and Krishna is his master, is his guru, basically. Now, in that part of the world, many people view Krishna as God now, capital G God, as they view Krishna as like another name for capital G God. All right. And in the West, many people view Jehovah as capital G God. That doesn't mean that Jehovah views himself that way. That's a separate talk. But back to Vyasa wrote that. Okay, fine. The conversations that I've had with him and other gurus, there's a whole bunch of them on the other side, is that they came up with this notion of karma around, nobody was keeping journal on this, but
Mhm.
they say approximately what we would consider 8 to 10,000 years ago, a long time ago. And they came up with this notion of karma because these spiritual, we'll call them spiritual guides, we'll call them, on the other side, were looking down at planet Earth, and they would every once in a while they would incarnate in a human body on planet Earth, mostly in the Himalayas and in India and so forth. But they would come down and then they go back and they would convene and they would talk and they would compare notes. and they say, you know what? These humans down there, they're killing each other, and they basically have sex, they get drunk, and they kill each other. That's what they're doing down there. That's pretty much, and they're eating. Those four things. That's pretty much what all these humans are doing.
Debauchery.
Yeah, maybe we could teach them instead of killing each other all the time, that there are consequences to one's actions. So they came up with this notion of karma, which means action, but then they added this notion that there are consequences to one's actions. So are there consequences to our actions? Yes.
Yes,
But
it's like the law of what is it? The law of cause and effect. Like I feel
yeah,
like is that, right?
that's all it is. Okay, that's how it started. And
Yeah.
then they started teaching that. They came, no, one of them would come down, or a bunch of them would come down and incarnate, and they would start teaching people this. I've like causation, like you say, that there's an effect from your actions and so forth and so forth. And you do this good stuff, you do this bad stuff, you hurt somebody. This and that, there's a consequence to that. They did not come up with this notion of good and bad karma credits, what I call the accounting system in the sky, is what I call it. That's the way a lot of people think of it these days today. It's just meant to teach people that there are consequences to one's actions. They don't last forever and ever and ever. So, because if you go to India now, there's a belief system in the karma system where people think that they've done made so many mistakes in their life that they have millions and millions of years of lifetimes that they have to work off that bad karma. So you'll hear the people use that phrase. It's a belief system that somebody made up along the way.
Like karma's got a bad name. Like it's not really a bitch. It's just the way the scales of the universe have
It's
been set
just,
up for
it's
us
just
to just rectify and create, like bring balance back into things and things like that.
yeah,
Um,
and back to the suicide thing.
yes, let's like
You're
bring it back
not
to that.
you're not you don't get bad karma from killing oneself. Again, that's this more westernized view, and it's in Asia as well. Are there consequences to one's action? Yeah, you're going to create a lot of sad people here on earth if you kill oneself by suicide. There's consequences to the action, absolutely, but you're not going to hell, you're not being punished, and you don't get this bad karma thing. That's this whole punishment thing.
Maybe now we touch on what do we not want to say to people, unless if you have any suggestions. I did end up writing a blog. There's this really cool magazine called Brains Magazine. And
Yeah,
you actually came across this because we had talked in the past, like, I want to do a thing on suicide. Here's what I've written on it. And funny enough, when I wrote this, I did touch on, I think, the 5 stages of grief. And we kind of unpacked that a little bit better. I have a
yeah,
better understanding of the 5 stages of grief. But
yeah.
there was a couple of things that came up when I had written that in terms of suggestions, but I wanted to get your opinion first, and then I could kind of cover a couple of these.
Yeah, it's just the thing that I think what people need to be careful about, especially if it's a suicide or a murder. In other words, a violent death of a loved one. So we'll just leave it at that. A more violent death. I think we need to be extra sensitive to not saying any of the myths that we have already talked about in the first and second sessions, episodes
Right.
of this series. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to those. It'll be
Yeah,
good.
review them.
But those are very, very important for us to stay away from, and just to be supportive and supportive listeners. That's the
Hmm.
thing. And if you're physically with the person, you can hug them if that seems appropriate, if you know them that well and so forth. But the notion that I just want to underscore again, I said this earlier, but the notion that it is either meant to be of what happened or that somehow they planned it, you hear this from mediums and other spiritual teachers, and it's horrific. It's a terrible message. It violates, first of all, the principle of free will, that somehow, I've already explained that, how it violates the principle of free will, choice, that is, I think, universal principle. Because the other people's choices and in my opinion, bad decisions, hurtful, bad meaning what? Hurtful decisions came into play that helped to help create this terrible outcome of either a suicide or a murder, and other minds involved are involved there. So there's no planning of one's. People always say, well, you plan your own death. Yeah, is it possible to do that? Yes, it is. Does it always work out? No, because that's true for any plan. It doesn't matter if we're talking soul plans, we're talking about a business plan. They don't always work out. Why? Because other minds are involved.
Yeah.
Banks are involved, other contractors involved, subcontractors are involved. They may go out of business, and then you got to get all kinds of things can happen in any deal that you're talking about, whether it's a business deal or you're talking about a plan of souls in a life deal, we'll call it, you
Mhm.
know, and there's no punishment. And so you just got to be careful if you're talking to somebody, just to be very, oh,
Gentle.
gentle is the word, because they're so, I mean, anybody who's lost a loved one, it doesn't matter if it's through illness, an accident, they died peacefully. The surviving loved ones are living their life on eggshells. They just are, because that's what grieving involves, right? And so you want to be very, very, very sensitive, especially if it's a tragic, violent kind of murder. Because why is that? Why do I say that? Because the violence brings an extra level of WTF to the situation, doesn't it? Really, it just
Yeah.
does. And you
Ah,
kind of go, wow, they were such a beautiful soul and such a beautiful person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
mhm.
And why? And everybody wants to know why. And there's not always a good reason. There's not always
Exactly.
a good answer to that. Yeah, each situation is so unique, you know.
Yeah.
There's no one thing you can say.
Yeah, exactly. So we definitely don't want to say you want to go back to one of those. I can't remember if it's episode 2 or 1 where we're
Yeah,
talking about the myths. It's in the
yeah,
title. I think some of the good things to say, like what to say, and you could put your 2 cents on this is like, I don't have the right words, but I care deeply about you. It's
yeah,
okay to feel however you're feeling right now, because a lot of times, just like with other situations with loss and grief and things, we want to try to like minimize their feelings or take them away. And so it's better for us to, if we don't know how to hold safe space and we don't know how to hold safe space for like heavy emotions, better not to even put yourself in that situation, because the chances of you saying or doing the wrong thing to exacerbate it
yeah,
could could, could happen.
exactly. Yeah, you just like you said, just to reinforce something you said, there's no right or wrong way to feel.
Right.
That's an important thing to share with people, because because they're usually it's so it's it's so uncommon. It's in a sense that it is not, they're not used to it. We're not used to losing a loved one violently, and we're not used to losing a loved one. And so in either case, it's the same situation insofar as there's no right and wrong to grieving. And that's a good thing to remind somebody sometimes of while they're grieving.
Yes. And there's no like time limit, and
No time
that's
frame.
no. When you lose a loved one in that capacity, like getting comfortable with the reality of what is, and
Yeah,
getting to a place of, when people hear acceptance, it's like, I'll never be able to accept the fact that somebody murdered them in such a brutal way. And
yeah,
that's not what we're saying. We're not saying accept how it happened. It's just,
right.
yeah, it's like, how do you get to a place so that you can free your own self of the suffering of going through the what ifs and the coulda, shoulda, wouldas and all these kinds of things.
Yeah,
Um,
the acceptance word, I think of it in terms of how can we move forward without feeling overwhelmed by the experience? Because
right.
you never ever forget.
No,
Nobody ever forgets.
no.
Oh, but the thing is, how can you move forward? Because we can move forward. That's the critical state to me. That's the critical point of healing. The other thing is, never ever say to somebody, and I've heard people, and people have told me this recently, who are
Mhm.
grieving, that people have said to them, "Oh, it's been a year since your husband died or your wife died or whatever, and you're still feeling way." Really? To say something that is so horrible, it's so demeaning, it's so disrespectful to say that. And people say stuff like that. And they think they're helping the person. It's like, well, it's been so long, you should be feeling great. If you're feeling okay now. What? No, there is no timeline, like Janie said, no timeline on this. You
Mhm.
could still be feeling raw 2 years later. Look, my mom died. I don't even know what the math is now. 40 something years later, ago, I mean. And I still get choked up thinking about talking about my mom sometimes. So it's not, I'm not overwhelmed by it like I was, but it's still raw because, I miss her. And so people say these things, they got to be really careful about stuff like that. You never ever say that. There is no timeline.
Exactly. And also too, just going back to, this episode specifically was about suicide and, our mental health, emotional health are so important. And at least in our Western culture, like we've disregarded it for so long. And I think with everything that's going on now and the way the statistics are and, depression and suicide rates are like increasing in the age range too, like even younger. And so collectively, right? Like learning how to speak about this and be there for our own selves and for each other so that we don't continue to exacerbate or perpetuate this unhealthy paradigm around death and grieving and emotions and suicide.
Yeah.
So, if there's any other little thing that you'd like to say, I feel like we touched on some good stuff for sure. There might be some thoughts that we have later and we can kind of touch on it on the next episode because
Yeah, no, I think what you just said is great. It's really, I think that sums it all up. When you using the word acceptance, I think of the word love. And so to me, that we're being a more loving person when we are accepting the state of being, and that means emotionally everything, but especially emotionally, we're talking about a grieving person. We're accepting them the way they are. That
Mhm.
is loving them. To me, that's what acceptance is. Accepting the person for who they are, not trying to change them into something else, and that means they're grieving and don't try to change them into something else.
Yeah,
That don't try to make them not grieve, no, they're grieving, acknowledge that, respect that. That is, in my opinion, that's how I think of true love.
true love for real. And I feel like we have a misunderstanding about what love actually is and what unconditional love means and things like that. And this is the type of stuff that Yeshua was talking about
Yeah,
embodying and being and representing.
yeah,
Pasmesa represents that like unconditional love and that
yeah,
sweet love.
because
Yeah.
love should be unconditional. Like I said, love is without condition already. If love
Hmm.
is accepting the other person for who they are, not who you want to make them into something else to be, love is unconditional. Love is not conditional.
It's not just this like total state of acceptance of like let people treat you however they want and however you want.
No.
It's about you've got a sense of agency and if you can
Well,
speak up
that's a
and say,
different that's a different type of that's a different issue with acceptance. So I draw a distinction between accepting the person for who they are, not who you're trying to make them wish they were, and their behavior. That's
yes,
two separate things. That's
exactly.
a, that's a whole different discussion about forgiveness that we can get into another time.
And then also too, what are the methods and things that we can do to help us process our grief? And I touched on it briefly, like I didn't get into it, but I was like, oh, I've got all these different ways in which it helps me deal with grief, like art and music and movement and things like that that people can do. I think it'd be kind of cool to touch a little bit on that. I want to thank you again, Kelvin, for being here with us and being a part of this project. This is such an important topic for us to, just unpack and touch on. And I'm grateful for everybody that's been tuning in. Obviously, if any of this information you feel someone can benefit from it, please share. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and you can contact Kelvin. You can do a free consultation with them. He's got websites, kelvinchin.org. There's a couple of other ones too. You have the Meditation Within.
Yeah, turning within. It's on my name there right there. Turning within. Yeah.
Perfect. And then, of course, the other one that we always plug too, which is the name of your book. It's Overcoming. It's
Overcoming the fear of death.
be sure to take advantage of that resource and everything else that we've been sharing here. And you do not have to go through grief alone, even though there are parts of it that you will go through by yourself. But it makes it a lot easier when you have somebody that can help make sense of it for you. It doesn't have to be as, what's the word I want to use?
Lonely.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be as lonely, even though it's lonely. So, thank you again, everybody, for watching. And as always, peace be in you. Pasmasa.
Thank you for watching Good Grief, meeting loss with presence one wave at a time. Be sure to subscribe to Rise Above TV and tune in for the next episode where we'll share more insights about grief so you can face it mindfully.